What's an explosion sound like? Most people don't know because most people have never heard one. So any sharp, loud bang, that's probably an explosion.
10 massive buildings were partially damaged or destroyed on 9/11. Everywhere, burning cars and trucks and petrol tanks exploding. But was any evidence found of the huge explosive charges that would be needed at the time of Tower 7's collapse?
When you're dealing with charges this size, the amount of air that is displaced will break windows easily.
Mark Loiseau was brought in by the Office of Emergency Management 3 days after 9/11 to advise on the removal of debris.
There were a lot of broken windows there, mainly from impact of debris, but I didn't see windows broken on the backs of buildings, only where debris falling from the towers struck it. But come around the backside, no. Windows weren't broken there. They were shielded from debris falling. If explosives of the magnitude necessary to cut the columns in a big building were detonated, the windows all the way around would have been shattered. No way around it.
And they would leave behind some unmistakable signs of explosives.
In a structure that is taken down with explosives, you would find these tubes. You would very likely find the upper portion of this cap where the delay element is.
Investigators for the first inquiry by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, were on the scene immediately. Dr. Gene Corley was the lead investigator. A structural engineer for 50 years, he did the forensic work on the Oklahoma City bombing, on the Waco fire, as well as the World Trade Center, all subjects of conspiracy theories.
We looked at everything. Controlled demolition was ruled out because there was no evidence of controlled demolition.
And you looked for evidence of it, did you?
We looked for it, yes. And we found no evidence of controlled demolition.
Every inch of the site was picked over by hundreds of people. No one reported any signs of explosives. Up in Utah, there's a scientist who thinks he has an explanation. His theory is so controversial, he left his job as a professor of physics because of it. Stephen Jones thinks he's found evidence of an unconventional explosive in the dust from the World Trade Center.
It is rather like a DNA in an investigation. In other words, this dust carries all this information of what caused it, what created it. And it holds on to that information, and it's just crying from the dust for us to look at it.
Professor Jones thinks there was a conspiracy to destroy Tower 7 and the Twin Towers using a strange substance that can quite literally melt steel.
Thermite is a very active chemical reaction. It produces molten iron spheres. The chemical pattern, the fingerprint of thermite, the spheres you get from thermite, matches the spheres that I see in the World Trade Center dust.
Both the dust and thermite contain iron oxide and aluminium.
What do you think? I would say that it melted out the whole side. Oh, it went right through the aluminum, of course, I should have. So as the thermite reacts, it blows molten iron into the air, where it forms droplets due to surface tension, and then those solidify and form these little spheres.
Using a scanning electron microscope, Professor Jones is able to produce high-resolution images of the spheres in the 9/11 dust. And he was given one sample from Brooklyn Bridge, found within an hour of the collapse of the Twin Towers. The dust was collected by photography student Frank D'Alessio.
Yeah, I was sort of playing with it that day. You could, I was pushing it off and sort of, it was like snow. There was, an abundant amount, caked up above. And I'm pretty sure I got it right within there, and then headed out.
This is the one that was within 20 minutes of the collapse of the towers. It was a great sample.
These iron-rich spheres can only be formed at very high temperatures. The office fires in Tower 7 on 9/11 were not hot enough. Professor Jones is convinced the spheres were formed by thermite, which generates extreme temperatures. When a NASA aeroplane flew over Ground Zero, the temperatures recorded were remarkably high. The highest within Tower 7's footprint was 727 degrees centigrade. Yet this was 5 days after 9/11, and firemen had been spraying huge amounts of water on the site. And there are reports of red-hot metal in the debris. But there is another explanation for the iron spheres. They could have come from cutting torches used after 9/11 to clear the site, or from any building work before. Stephen Jones says that doesn't explain the presence of aluminium, and he thinks these red chips in the dust could even be unreacted thermite.
I saw thermite once in high school. It was very impressive, but I've never seen anyone use a material which melts steel for demolition purposes. I don't see how you could possibly get all of the columns to melt through at the same time.
On the internet, there are references to secret formulations of thermite that have special properties.
You can cut with thermite without a large explosion. You see? In other words, for thermite, you can formulate it to burn rapidly or slowly. The key is nanothermite. Why won't people deal with super thermite? It's like they don't want to see it, I guess. I don't know, but it does exist. We have reports of it in a sol gel form. It's very explosive. The sol gel can be formed and shaped.
I suppose you can keep saying, but what if, and you could go to Fantasyland and make up whatever you wanted. It's just not real. It's not real. The materials and the technologies just aren't there. If they were, I'd know.
Mark Loiseau is not unbiased due to his very wealthy clientele. He also works for the federal government. He can't come out and say this is a controlled demolition if he doesn't want to lose many of his top clients.
But other people have gone much further and accused Mark Loiseau of being part of a conspiracy.
But they say that you did work at Ground Zero, which you did, and you've got the absolute perfect credentials for a government-paid demolition expert, and of course you're going to say, I didn't do it, but you've absolutely fit the bill.
I'd make a great terrorist, I suppose. Unfortunately, I don't have those inclinations.
Since 9/11, Mark Loiseau and his company have been the subject of a hate campaign and even accused of mass murder.
I'm disturbed by 9/11. I'm disturbed by all of this. But I think there are ways to handle it and ways that you don't handle it. And you certainly don't terrorize people like the good folks that work here and family members.
A new Building 7 was opened in 2006. It's thinner, but taller than the previous one. Over the last nearly 7 years, the work on clearing and rebuilding Ground Zero has continued, and new evidence has emerged which supports the official theory that fire brought Tower 7 down. This is some of the only footage of the south face of the building, and it shows the whole side engulfed in smoke. Until now, most people have only seen the other sides, where there was much less obvious damage. Richard Rotans had to assess the damage to Tower 7, and crucially, he saw the south face just after the north tower had collapsed, slamming debris into it.
We're looking at the upper floors at Tower 7. You can see columns gone, floors collapsed, heavy smoke coming out, and fire. The upper floors were an inferno.
And then he had to go into that building to assess it.
You could hear the building creak above us. You could hear things fall. You could hear the fire burning. You could see columns just hanging from the upper floors, gaping holes in the floors up above us. There was an elevator car that was blown out of its shaft and it was down the hall. This is, the massive impact from the fall of Tower 1 onto Tower 7.
And there are photographs that show much more clearly the extent of the damage from the collapse of the North Tower and the fires that followed in Tower 7.
We need volunteers for first aid. We have water, we have a little water here. Raid the buses, raid the trucks.
One photographer was able to get close to Building 7 because he was an honorary deputy chief in the fire department. These are some of his pictures.